There are moments when the pressure you feel doesn't match what you can see. Nothing around you looks extreme, but inside, something feels targeted, consistent resistance, unexpected setbacks, a heaviness that shows up at the same time again and again. And the most frustrating part is this: you try to move forward, but it feels like something keeps pushing back, quickly, relentlessly. I'm going to tell you something most people never hear explained clearly. Not every battle is visible. Some are patterns, some are cycles, and some are sustained by what you don't recognize. I didn't always understand this from where I stand now. There was a time I was deeply involved in the occult, trained to observe how repetition works, how pressure is maintained, and how certain patterns are allowed to continue simply because they are never interrupted. And one thing was always clear: people don't lose because they are weak, they lose because they are unaware. I remember this clearly. There were specific passages in the book of Psalms that were never taken lightly, not because of tradition, but because of precision. These weren't just words, they were targeted. They addressed patterns directly. They interrupted what was trying to continue. Now listen carefully. This is not about fear. This is about awareness, because many people pray, but they pray without direction. They speak generally, while the pressure they are facing is specific. And when there is no precision, there is no interruption. Now imagine this: you are facing repeated resistance, the same type of delay, the same kind of pressure, the same cycle, over and over again. And instead of addressing it directly, you speak around it. That's where most people remain stuck. Now listen carefully. In this message, I'm going to show you three specific warfare psalms, not in a complicated way, but in a clear, structured way, so you understand why they matter and how to use them with intention. Because once you understand this, you stop speaking randomly. You start speaking with direction. And when your words have direction, patterns don't continue the same way anymore. Now, this is the first psalm you need to understand, because it addresses something many people feel but rarely identify correctly: not a single event, but ongoing pressure. I remember this clearly. People would describe it in different ways. I feel watched. I feel targeted. Things keep going wrong for no clear reason. But when you looked closely, it wasn't random, it was consistent. Now listen carefully. The first psalm is Psalm 23. Most people know it. Most people have heard it, but very few understand how precise it actually is. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. At first, it sounds peaceful, comforting, but it's more than that. It's alignment. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. Before pressure is broken, your state must be stabilized. Because when your state is unstable, everything feels amplified. Every problem feels bigger. Every delay feels heavier. I saw this again and again. People were under pressure. But what made it worse was their internal state: restless, unsettled, constantly reacting. Now listen carefully. This psalm does something specific. It brings your system back into order. It slows everything down. It recenters you. Now imagine this. Instead of starting your day already tense, already expecting resistance, you declare something different. I am guided. I am provided for. I am restored. That shift alone changes how you experience everything. Now here's something very important. This psalm is not about escaping pressure. It's about not being controlled by it. Because when you are steady, pressure loses intensity. I saw this clearly. People who used this consistently didn't eliminate every challenge instantly, but they stopped feeling overwhelmed by it. Now listen carefully. You speak this psalm when you feel constant pressure, when things feel unstable, when your mind feels unsettled, not rushed, not distracted, but intentionally. Now imagine this. Your thoughts slow down, your breathing steadies, your focus returns. That creates space. And in that space, you are no longer reacting, you are stable. Now listen carefully. This is the first step, stabilization, because before anything is broken externally, you must become steady internally. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the second psalm that directly confronts opposition and begins to shift what has been standing against you repeatedly. Now, this is where the tone shifts because once you are stable, you are no longer just managing pressure. You are ready to confront what's been resisting you. I remember this clearly. This was the stage where things became more direct, not passive, not just internal, but intentional. Now listen carefully. The second psalm is Psalm 35. This is not a quiet psalm, this is a confrontational one. Contend, Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. May those who seek my life be disgraced and put to shame. At first, this may sound intense, direct, even uncomfortable, but it's precise. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. There are moments when you don't just need peace. You need clarities about resistance because not every obstacle is neutral. Some things persist because they are never challenged. I saw this again and again. People stayed in cycles because they never shifted from passive to intentional. They kept hoping things would change without ever addressing what was continuing. Now listen carefully. This psalm does something specific. It brings confrontation, not emotional reaction, but clear direction. Now imagine this. Instead of accepting repeated resistance, you recognize it, you name it, you stop treating it as normal. That shift alone breaks agreement. Now here's something very important. This is not about anger, it's about awareness. Because when something is identified clearly, it loses its ability to remain hidden. I saw this pattern clearly. People who used this psalm with understanding stopped tolerating what they once accepted, and that alone changed how things showed up in their lives. Now listen carefully. You don't use this psalm constantly. You use it when something is clearly repeating, when resistance feels targeted, when the same type of pressure shows up again and again. Now imagine this. You stop ignoring patterns. You stop normalizing them. You address them directly. That creates a shift because once something is confronted, it cannot continue in the same quiet way. Now, listen carefully. This is the second step, confrontation, not emotional, but intentional. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the third psalm, the one that brings covering, protection, and closure. So what has been confronting you does not continue unchecked. Now, this is the final psalm, and this is where everything is secured, because it's not enough to stabilize your state, and it's not enough to confront resistance. You must also close the door on what has been repeating. I remember this clearly. This was the part most people skipped. They would feel better, they would even see small shifts, but they never established consistency of protection. And because of that, things returned. Now listen carefully. The third psalm is Psalm 91. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day. This is not just comfort, this is positioning. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. Protection is not something you visit occasionally, it's something you remain in. I saw this again and again. People would speak powerful words once, but then go back to being unguarded in their thinking, unstable in their focus, and open to the same patterns. Now listen carefully. This psalm creates something very specific, covering a consistent state where you are no longer exposed the same way. Now imagine this. Instead of reacting to problems after they appear, you position yourself before they take form. You establish a mindset of protection. You maintain awareness. You stay grounded. That changes everything. Now here's something very important. This is not about avoiding life. It's about not being vulnerable to repeated disruption. Because when you remain in a stable, aware state, things don't affect you the same way. I saw this clearly. People who applied this consistently stopped feeling like they were constantly under pressure, not because challenges disappeared, but because nothing stayed attached. Now listen carefully. You use this psalm daily, not occasionally, not only when something feels wrong, but as a consistent position, morning, night, moments of stillness. Now imagine this. You begin your day with awareness. You move through your day with control, and you end day with closure. That creates a full cycle. And once that cycle is in place, old patterns struggle to return. Now listen carefully. This is the final step, covering. Because once something is covered consistently, it no longer has the same access. And when access is removed, repetition weakens. That's how closure is created. That's how cycles end. And that's how what once felt constant stops continuing the same way. Now, this is where most people miss everything because they hear powerful psalms. They feel something in the moment, but they never turn it into a system. And without a system, nothing stays consistent. I remember this clearly. People would speak these psalms randomly, only when things felt heavy, only when pressure showed up. But by then, they were already reacting. Now listen carefully. These three psalms are not meant to be used randomly. They follow a sequence, a structure, and when you apply them in order, they create a complete cycle. Now imagine this. You wake up in the morning, before distractions, before your phone, before outside noise, you begin with the first psalm. You stabilize your state. You remind yourself, I am guided. I am not lacking. I am restored. That's your foundation. Now listen carefully. Then, as your day unfolds, moments of pressure will appear, unexpected delays, negative thoughts, situations that try to pull your focus. This is where the second psalm comes in, not loudly, not emotionally, but intentionally. You recognize the pattern. You refuse to accept it as normal. You confront it with clarity. That's your interruption. Now, here's the final part. At the end of your day, before you sleep, you move into the third psalm. You don't carry everything forward. You don't replay the entire day endlessly. You position yourself in covering. You settle your mind. You close the day completely. That's your protection. Now listen carefully. This creates a full structure. You start with stability. You move with awareness. You end with closure. And when that repeats daily, something powerful happens. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Patterns that were built daily must be broken daily, not once, not occasionally, but consistently. I saw this again and again. People who followed this structure didn't experience sudden dramatic change overnight, but they experienced steady transformation, less pressure, more clarity, more control. Now imagine this. Every day begins with alignment. Every challenge is met with intention. Every night ends with protection. That cycle becomes your new normal. Now listen carefully. You don't need more complexity. You need consistency because simple structure, repeated daily, breaks even the strongest patterns over time. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you what happens when this becomes your habit, when you no longer struggle to remember what to do, and your response becomes automatic, steady, and controlled. Now, this is where everything shifts from effort to something natural, because at the beginning, you have to remind yourself, you have to slow down, you have to apply each step intentionally. But I remember this clearly. There comes a point where you don't have to force it anymore. It becomes automatic. Now listen carefully. When you repeat a structure daily, your mind adapts to it, not temporarily, but consistently. And once that happens, you don't wake up the same way anymore. Now here's what begins to change. You wake up, and instead of feeling pressure immediately, you feel steady. Your thoughts don't rush. Your mind doesn't feel scattered. There is space. That's the first shift. Now, during your day, when something tries to pull you, you don't react instantly. You pause, even if it's just for a moment. It's enough. You recognize what's happening. You choose your response. That alone breaks repetition. I saw this again and again. People who used to feel overwhelmed quickly started handling the same situations calmly, not because the situations changed, but because their response did. Now listen carefully. At night, something even more important happens. You don't carry everything forward. You don't replay every conversation. You don't lie down with pressure still active. Instead, you close your day completely. And because of that, your rest becomes deeper. Now imagine this. Days no longer feel connected in a heavy way. You don't feel like you're continuing the same cycle. Each day feels separate, clear, manageable. Now, here's something very important. This doesn't mean challenges disappear. It means they don't stay the same because your system is no longer feeding them. I saw this pattern clearly. People who stayed consistent stopped feeling like everything was working against them, not because everything changed overnight, but because nothing continued the same way. Now listen carefully. This is what real stability feels like. Not forced, not temporary, but steady, reliable, available every day. Now imagine this. You move through your day with clarity. You respond with control. You end with closure. That becomes your rhythm. And once that rhythm is established, old patterns don't have the same place in your life anymore. Now listen carefully. This is the result of consistency, simple structure, repeated daily, until it becomes who you are. And once it becomes part of you, you don't go back to how it was before, because your mind has learned a new way to operate, and that changes everything moving forward. Now, this is the part most people don't expect. Because after everything you've heard, it might seem like the power was only in the Psalms themselves. But I remember this clearly. That was never the full truth. The words matter. But what they create inside you is what changes everything. Now listen carefully. These Psalms were never meant to be used like a formula, not something you repeat mechanically hoping something shifts. They were meant to guide your state, to reshape how you start, how you respond, and how you end. That's the real power. Now here's the truth you need to understand. What has been repeating in your life was not just external, it was internal continuation, pars of thought, pars of reaction, pars of carrying things forward without closing them. And once those internal patterns change, everything else begins to follow. I saw this is again and again. People focused on breaking something outside while unknowingly maintaining the same cycle inside. And because of that, nothing fully changed. Now listen carefully. When you stabilize your state, you stop amplifying pressure. When you confront resistance, you stop accepting repetition. When you create covering and closure, you stop carrying things forward. That's the full sequence. Not complicated, but complete. Now imagine this. You no longer wake up expecting the same struggle. You no longer react the same way to pressure. You no longer carry yesterday into today. That alone interrupts what used to repeat. Now here's something very important. You don't need to force change. You need to stop continuing what was already happening. Because once continuation stops, the pattern weakens on its own. Now listen carefully. This is the final realization. It was never just about saying the Psalms. It was about becoming aligned with what they represent: clarity, control, closure. And once those become part of your daily rhythm, you don't just speak differently, you live differently. Now imagine this. Instead of feeling like something is constantly working against you, you feel movement, progress, lightness, not because everything changed overnight, but because nothing is being carried the same way anymore. Now listen carefully. This is where real change begins, not in one moment, but in a new pattern. And once that pattern is established, what once felt constant no longer continues the same way. That's the shift most people are searching for, but only find when they stop repeating what was never meant to stay. Now, this is where everything becomes real in your life. Not something you heard, not something you tried once, but something you live. Because at this point, you understand the structure, you understand the Psalms, you understand the pattern. But now it comes down to one thing: consistency. I remember this clearly. This was the difference between people who experienced temporary relief and those who experienced lasting change. Not knowledge, but daily application. Now listen carefully. What you repeat daily becomes your reality. If you repeat pressure, you feel pressure. If you repeat reaction, you stay in cycles. But if you repeat structure, you create stability. Now imagine this. Every morning, you don't start randomly. You align yourself. You stabilize your state before anything else touches your mind. During the day, you don't move unconsciously. You recognize pressure when it appears. You choose your response. You don't feed what tries to pull you. And at night, you don't carry everything forward. You close your day completely. That cycle becomes your protection. Now listen carefully. This is not about perfection. There will be moments you forget, moments you react, moments you feel the old pattern trying to return. But now you recognize it, and recognition changes everything. Because once you see a pattern clearly, you don't stay in it without awareness. Now here's something very important. You don't need to fight constantly. You just need to stay consistent, because consistency weakens what used to control you. I saw this again and again. People who stayed consistent stopped feeling like everything was working against them, not because life became easy, but because nothing stayed attached, nothing stayed repeated. Now imagine this. You move through your days with clarity, you respond with control, you end with closure. That creates peace, that creates direction, that creates stability. Now listen carefully. This is what it means to walk in daily authority, not loud, not forced, but steady. And once that becomes your rhythm, you don't just experience change, you maintain it. That's the difference, that's the shift. And that's what most people never realize. Freedom is not something you find once, it's something you practice every single day. Now, this is the part most people underestimate because after they feel the shift, after things start getting lighter, they assume it will stay that way automatically. I remember this clearly. This is where many people lost the progress they made, not because it wasn't real, but because it wasn't protected. Now, listen carefully. Anything you build with consistency can be weakened by inconsistency, not all at once, but gradually, quietly. Now imagine this. You stop your morning alignment just for a day, then another day. You begin reacting instead of pausing. You stop closing your day properly. Nothing feels wrong immediately, but slowly, the same patterns begin to return. That's how it happens. Now listen carefully. Old patterns don't disappear completely. They lose strength. And if you stop reinforcing your new pattern, the old one tries to rebuild. I saw this again and again. People experience clarity, peace, control, but then they return to reacting unconsciously. And without realizing it, they reopened what they had already closed. Now, here's the truth you need to understand: awareness without consistency leads back to repetition, because knowing what to do is not the same as doing it daily. Now imagine this. You stay aware, you notice small shifts early. The moment your thoughts start becoming heavy again, you reset. The moment you feel pulled into reaction, you pause. The moment you sense you're carrying things forward again, you close it. That awareness protects everything you've built. Now, listen carefully. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to correct quickly, because quick correction stops full repetition. Now, here's something very important. Before, you didn't see the pattern, now you do. And once you see something clearly, you have control over it. Now, imagine this. Every time the old pattern tries to return, you interrupt it immediately. You don't let it grow. You don't let it settle. That keeps you moving forward. Now, listen carefully. This is the final warning. Don't return unconsciously to what you've already broken consciously. Because if you go back, the pattern doesn't restart from zero. It rebuilds faster. But if you stay consistent, it never regains the same strength again. That's the difference between temporary relief and lasting transformation. Now, this is where everything finally settles. Not because life becomes free of challenges, but because you stop being internally controlled by them. I remember this clearly. This was the stage where people stopped asking, "Why is this happening again?" and started asking something very different. "How do I respond now?" That shift alone changes everything. Now, listen carefully. Most people live inside reaction. Something happens, and immediately they respond emotionally, mentally, without pause, without observation. And because of that, life feels like it's happening to them. Now, here's the truth you need to understand: you cannot control everything outside you, but you can control your internal position. And that position is everything. Now, imagine this: something stressful appears, a thought rises, a situation unfolds. But instead of reacting instantly, you pause, even if it's just for a moment. You become aware of what is happening inside you. That awareness creates space, and that space creates control. Now, listen carefully. When you are inside reaction, you are inside the pattern. But when you observe, you step outside it. And from outside, you can choose differently. I saw this again and again. People who learned to observe themselves stopped being pulled into the same emotional cycles. Not because problems disappeared, but because their response changed. Now, here's something very important: observation is not detachment from life, It is clarity within life. You still feel, you still experience, but you are no longer controlled by every impulse. Now imagine this. You notice your thoughts before you act on them. You notice your emotions before they take over. You notice repetition before it completes itself. That awareness interrupts continuation. Now listen carefully. This is where real stability begins. Not when everything outside changes, but when your internal response changes. Because life will always present something, but not everything deserves immediate reaction. Now here's the truth. The more you observe, the less you react, and the less you react, the less power old patterns have over you. Now imagine this. You move through your day with awareness, not chaos, not confusion, but steady observation. That alone brings clarity back into your system. Now listen carefully. This is the final shift. You are no longer inside the pattern, you are watching it. And once you can see it clearly, you are no longer trapped by it. That is where true freedom stabilizes. Now, this is the part where everything becomes even clearer and also more honest, because most people assume the struggle is something outside of them, something external, something attacking, something constantly working against them. But I remember this clearly. Once you understand patterns deeply enough, you realize something uncomfortable but freeing. A lot of what continues externally is sustained internally first. Now listen carefully. This does not mean everything is your fault. That's not the point. The point is awareness. Because if you only focus on what is outside, you miss what is reinforcing it inside. Now imagine this. You feel pressure in your life, and you keep looking for the source everywhere else. People, situations, timing, circumstances. But you never pause to observe. How are you responding? What are you repeating internally? What are you agreeing with mentally? That's where the real shift begins. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. External patterns gain strength when internal patterns stay unchanged. I saw this again and again. People wanted change, but their inner reactions stayed the same. Their thoughts stayed the same. Their emotional cycles stayed the same. And because of that, even when situations shifted slightly, the experience felt familiar again. Now listen carefully. The moment you change your internal response, you interrupt external repetition, not instantly, not dramatically, but consistently. Now imagine this. Something that used to trigger you no longer pulls you into the same emotional cycle. Something that used to feel overwhelming now feels manageable, not because it disappeared, but because your response changed. That alone weakens its repetition. Now, here's something very important. This is why observation is so powerful, because observation gives you distance, and distance gives you choice, and choice gives you control. Now, listen carefully. You don't need to fight every external situation. You need to stop feeding the internal reaction that keeps it alive. That is the real shift. I saw this clearly. People who mastered this understanding stopped feeling like life was happening against them and started noticing how their internal world was shaping their external experience. Now imagine this. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause. Instead of repeating emotional patterns, you observe. Instead of continuing internal chaos, you reset. That is where change begins. Now listen carefully. This is the deeper truth most people never reach. You are not just reacting to life, you are participating in its continuation. And once you understand that, you regain control not over everything, but over yourself. And that changes everything that follows. Now, this is where everything either becomes permanent or slowly fades away again. And I remember this clearly. This was the stage most people misunderstood completely because they thought understanding was enough. They thought insight alone would hold everything in place, but it doesn't. Now listen carefully. Understanding opens the door, but consistency keeps it open. Now imagine this. You've seen the pattern, you've learned the structure, you've felt the shift. But if you stop applying it, the old rhythm quietly returns. Not all at once, but gradually. Now here's the truth you need to understand. What becomes unbreakable in your life is not what you understand once, but what you repeat daily without compromise. I saw this again and again. People had breakthroughs, but no structure to sustain them, so they drifted back into reaction, back into repetition, back into the same cycles. Now listen carefully. This is why consolidation matters. You take everything you've learned and you simplify it into daily practice, not complexity, not overthinking, but structure. Now imagine this. You no longer question what to do each day. You already know. You already apply it. Morning alignment, daily awareness, evening closure. That cycle becomes automatic. Now, here's something very important. When something becomes automatic, it becomes stable. And when it becomes stable, it becomes harder to disrupt. I saw this clearly. People who reached this stage stopped feeling internally scattered, stopped feeling like they were constantly restarting because they were no longer rebuilding every day. They were maintaining. Now listen carefully. This is where your life changes quietly, not dramatically, but deeply, because your internal foundation is no longer unstable. It is structured. Now imagine this. You move through life without constant emotional resets. You respond instead of react. You close instead of carry. You observe instead of absorb. That creates a different kind of strength. Now here's the truth. Most people are trying to fix life externally without stabilizing internally. But once your internal structure is consistent, external noise loses influence. Now listen carefully. This is the consolidation stage. You don't learn it again, you live it. And once it becomes your normal way of operating, you stop going back to confusion because clarity is no longer occasional. It is your foundation.